Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you coming out here for our webinar on rapid rehousing. Just as a heads up, if you have any questions for the presenters at all, feel free to put them in the chat or send them to me directly, or use the Q&A feature, and we'll try to address those when we open up for discussion. And then to get us started today, I'm going to hand over the floor to Lily Seals.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for our webinar, supporting the work of rapidly rehousing. So thank you all for being here. I think we can move to the next slide. We can continue. There we go. Supporting the work of rapidly housing people experiencing homelessness. So thank you all for being here. Want to certainly extend you a warm welcome. Thank you all for placing the information in the chat so we can see where you all are from. We certainly see Tennessee, we see North Dakota, so thank you all for being here. We're going to move to our landing acknowledgement. So we like to start our meetings with a landing acknowledgement. We know that every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will, some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hope of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. So in that, we're going to put the information in the chat. If you would like to find out where, wherever you are, whether you're at home, working remotely, or if you are in the office, just if you would like to find out where, what traditional lanes you are on, you can certainly find that out by looking at, clicking on that website. And for me, I want to say that this meeting is being held on the traditional lands of the Kuso people, and I pay my respect to the elders, both past and present, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. And we're going to talk about, we always start with the promise of community action, the why we do what we do in our communities. So feel free to say this along with me. Community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. We are going to introduce you all to our practice transformation team. So we have our Senior Vice President, Tiffany Marley. We have Amy Roberts, who's our Senior Associate for Learning and Dissemination. We have Taylor Daniel, who is also our Senior Associate for Learning and Dissemination. And then two of our team members who are supporting you here today. You heard from Peter Coyne, who's our Program Associate for Communications and Dissemination. And I am Lily Seals, the Director of Practice Transformation. We have a wonderful group of presenters here with us today. So we have Kashmia Bryant, who is the Senior Technical Assistant Specialist with the National Alliance on Homelessness. And we have Brian Ringwright, who is the Director of Social Services Program in Hartford Community Action Agency in Aberdeen, Maryland. Our agenda for today, we certainly have had our welcome. You will hear from our presenters. We'll have a little bit of a discussion. So we want to make sure that you all are engaged. If you have any questions, you can certainly put that information into the chat. And then we will have just some upcoming events that you may want to participate in, as well as a link to the evaluation form. I want to talk a little bit about the reason why we're here today. This is brought to you via our Learning Communities Resource Center. The Learning Community, LCRC, may also be known as LCRC, is our innovations hub where we talk about innovative anti-poverty practices. And one of our focus areas is housing expansion opportunities and homeless prevention. And this learning community group focuses on a spectrum of housing challenges and opportunities. It focuses on frontline service provision, advocacy, policy development, and planning. And we are so excited that we've been able to partner with the National Alliance on Homelessness to bring this webinar bring this information for you today. And for those of you who are live, you'll also be in for a treat because we do have some additional resources also for this webinar. So stay tuned, stay to the end. And with that, I will hand off to Tashmia Bryant.
Thank you for that introduction and for the opportunity. I'm going to share my screen so you guys can see the slides I prepared for you guys today. Okay, let me know if you're having any issues with viewing them. All right. So I'll get started. I wanted to again just thank you all for the opportunity. So excited to be partnering and sharing this information about rapid rehousing with you all. Just to kind of review what we're going to be discussing today, I'm going to talk about the relationship between rapid rehousing and an effective homeless response system, the role that rapid rehousing plays in ending homelessness, and a little bit about rapid rehousing itself. And then we're going to hear from Brian, who is doing the work of rapid rehousing. And you guys are going to get so much information about, potential ways that you all can support the work as well. And then we'll have some discussion. So as you guys are listening to this presentation, I do encourage you to be mindful that, your experience in rapid rehousing can exist on a continuum. It really could be, just supporting the work of rapid rehousing providers and rapid rehousing programs, or it could be actually having a rapid rehousing program. It really could, be on a continuum. And so I want you guys to just pay attention to that as I'm speaking, highlighting certain areas of what you might be interested in and might have the capacity and resources to do. I wanted to start off also with just, you guys said who's all here in the chat, your organizations and locations, but I wanted to do something a little bit different and understand what is your experience in understanding of rapid rehousing. So in the chat, if you could, please enter a number 3. If you're very familiar, you may have even done rapid rehousing. 2, if you're slightly familiar, you may have heard about it, sounds familiar, you might know a little bit, something about it. And 1, if you're like, rapid rehousing, like, what is that? Or, maybe this is your first time, really getting some education and information about rapid rehousing. So that's a 1 if you're like, I'm not sure. So put that in the chat just so we could get a sense, of who's here. Okay. Lots of 3s. Okay, that's very shocking. I was like, maybe we'll get a couple 1s. Okay, 1.5, a decent amount of 2s. I'm actually not seeing very many 1s. So that's great. That's good to know. I will be giving some introductory, basic information, but we will be talking about some of the more extensive information and additional things that people should be thinking about. But yes, Brian, a very well seasoned group for sure. Okay, awesome. So thank you for participating in that little exercise. So this is ultimately an effective homeless response system. These are the components that a system should ultimately have. Some point of entry. Coordinated entry allows for people to enter in a coordinated way where it's not first come, first serve. They have a point of entry, whether they're calling 211 or there's an access point, an agency that, does the coordinated entry and gets those intakes. And the triage. So ultimately understanding what someone's predicament is, what is their situation, what are they calling about, trying to do some diversion, is there information that we can use to assist this person, maybe some small resources, referrals, things like that. And see if, we can prevent an experience of homelessness or quickly end an experience of homelessness right then and there. If for whatever reason, the person's situation requires shelter, then, facilitating that support of that household. I say person, but I'm really referring to household. So maybe one person or, a group of people that belong to one household. facilitating that support that they may need in shelter. In shelter, you're going to see, if you see that line above that says rapid exit, in shelter, those problem-solving conversations continue. They continue, and you're trying to quickly assist that person into permanent housing. Shelter is absolutely still homelessness, and so we want to ensure that folks are getting even out of shelter as quickly as possible and into permanent housing. After that, let's say, shelter is not necessarily, the person needs additional resources and we can't rapidly exit that person from shelter. Then there are additional resources that come into play, more expensive resources, but necessary, like rapid rehousing, which is short-term subsidy and case management, help with moving assistance, rental assistance. That is rapid rehousing. And same idea, we're trying to quickly provide that person exactly what they need, tailor those services so that they can maintain and sustain permanent housing outside of the program. There's transitional housing programs, which aren't permanent housing necessarily. They are kind of interim, providing people assistance and then assisting them into the housing market, into permanent housing. So those exist as well. And then there's more expensive and more intensive services like permanent supportive housing, which provide subsidy, so that rental assistance in addition to intensive services. So whether someone has a mental health issue, substance use issue, those services and supports are there to be able to assist that person a little bit more long-term than something like rapid rehousing. One thing at the very bottom I didn't mention is that street outreach can also be that point of contact and can help someone directly into shelter or directly into rapid housing, and sometimes directly into permanent supportive housing, depending on how those decisions are made within a continuum of care. Or you'll hear the word COC. So how their decisions are being made within that group, within that community. And it does it quickly. Again, to end homelessness, we're making homelessness rare, brief, and one time, non-reoccurring. So we want to ensure that once people are identified, we're able to quickly respond to their needs and assist them into permanent housing. So you want to ensure you're doing it quickly. And it's not here, but I added it to my updated version of the slide, but it does it also equitably. It does it quickly, but it does it equitably as well. And it really requires that tailored touch and that client-led, housing focused touch as well. So the goal of rapid rehousing is to move households, again, quickly into permanent housing. You want to reduce the length of time people are spending homeless, help exit those households quickly into permanent housing. And when we say quickly, you're trying to tailor the services that people identify what they need and tailor it to their experiences. So you're giving them just enough, not more, not less than what they need. So we say quick, we mean adequate, giving them those appropriate amount of services so that they can sustain in permanent housing. And then you want to limit those returns to housing. So returns to homelessness. You want to ensure that the support that you're providing is long-term, is sustainable, so that folks aren't returning back into homelessness after, the services that you're providing. And I say all of this, guys, again, for a reason that, get your wheels turning, because this takes so many different steps, so much collaboration, so much partnership to be able to accomplish these goals. And again, you want it to be very inclusive. So ensure that programs are equitable, accessible for everyone. And you want to be mindful that certain folks have greater tenancy barriers that may require additional supports and resources. So again, saying this all for a reason, because that's where you might come in and provide those supports that are needed to be able to meet these goals of ending homelessness. So the system-wide approach to rapid housing, you want to ensure that everyone in the system is on the same page. We want to ensure that we believe that housing is ultimately the solution to homelessness. It's not necessarily sobriety. It's not necessarily following a treatment plan or anything like that. It's housing. People are homeless because they do not have housing. So that we're on the same page with that. And also that the goal and effective crisis response is to rehouse people quickly. We want to ensure that people are obtaining permanent housing, we're ending their homelessness quickly, and that it works for most people. We want to ensure that it has the greatest access, and that we're all on the same page with those types of understandings. So one of the approaches that we want to be on the same page with is housing first. The philosophy of housing first includes the ideas that there's no prerequisites to housing. There's no program people have to go through or anything like that. Housing first truly is a philosophy that anyone can believe in and adapt. Everyone is ready for housing now, that homelessness is a housing problem, and that issues can be best addressed when people are permanently housed. So whether that's employment or managing your mental health conditions that you might have, sobriety, obtaining sobriety, or following a treatment plan, those can be best done when someone's in permanent housing, out of that fight or flight state. And also housing first means housing fast. Again, doing so equitably, but ensuring that you're acting efficiently and effectively so that that household can get into permanent housing as quickly as possible. And we can't predict future stability. We don't know whether a person who has a criminal record or has co-occurring disorders, we don't know how successful or unsuccessful they'll be in permanent housing. We can't predict those things. So again, just having that belief that everyone is ready for housing now. And in practice, that looks like not having those prerequisites to permanent housing, not saying that you have to, complete this program or do certain things before you can have access to permanent housing. Ensure there's rapid entry, that those processes and procedures are very quick and efficient to get, once folks are identified, get them into that rapid housing, into permanent housing as soon as possible. I believe that everyone is ready for housing now. And also that services are voluntary. I mean, I'm sure after getting to know someone, you might have recommendations like, oh, this might be very helpful. Here's this program, here's how to access it. I can take you there, all these great supports and recommendations. But if a person or a household does not want to engage, it's voluntary and it's not it doesn't determine whether or not they can access housing, permanent housing. And ensure that standard leases. So there aren't no special requirements for people that are experiencing homelessness. They have to sign special leases or anything like that. They are receiving that same, leases, those same agreements as anyone else in our community. So again, housing first in action looks like believing everyone is ready for housing now, and that means everyone. Again, sometimes there are comments where it's like, oh, this person's not going to last, or sometimes you hear the bias that exists and the doubt that exists, and that is truly anti-housing first. So it really manifests itself in our everyday decisions, our everyday conversations that we have. So rapid rehousing has 3 core components. So the first one is housing identification. Some things to consider, important things to think about, is that there are 9 standards, program standards for housing identification. And they include things like actively recruiting and retaining landlords, finding housing that participants can maintain, and helping them to access desirable and affordable units for them. So some common activities. Again, pay attention. These are things that, you might be interested in and be able to support. Some common activities for housing identification may include, assisting a household with application, identifying vacant properties, viewing properties, building relationships with landlords, incentives for landlords, which we'll hear a lot about. I know Brian's going to speak to that. I'm really excited. But incentives for landlords, that could be monetary incentives, but it could be additional things like help, having a relationship with the rapid rehousing program, providing landlord mitigation funds, ensuring that they have low vacancy rates. Like, hey, I can fill all of these units. I have clients, I have households that are ready to be housed now that can fill all of your units, and say if there's any issues that happen, we can quickly get another household in there if it makes sense to relocate a household. So no eviction costs, having that relationship with landlords to be able to, compromise and negotiate. It also might include, an activity might include educating the households on their rights and protections, thinking about shared housing, thinking about fair housing, and understanding that that some clients may face discrimination in the rental market related to their race, related to the fact that they have a subsidy, disability, familial status, if they have kids, that could be, they can experience discrimination, things like that. So some activities might be really educating and informing landlords, the community, and households. With that comes some common issues that might arise. So, household needing assistance getting identification. They might need transportation to get to the, view apartments. We need more landlords. We need more partners. The incentives might be an issue if, so certain programs are under resourced, don't have access to that. And then the lack of affordable housing. So just working with landlords who will support shared housing and identifying available units that are affordable. That's another common issue that perhaps you can provide some support on. And you guys feel free to ask questions in the chat too. I have it open, so I'm monitoring that as we go along. Any ideas, anything that sticks out, that too. So housing identification as a philosophy, again, everyone's ready to be housed now. You're helping folks with locating housing and then doing that ongoing landlord recruitment. But that looks like actively, like on an ongoing basis, building those relationships with landlords. In some communities, there's one sole person who's doing that, that's dedicated to their, what they're dedicating their job to. All day they're calling landlords or following up and, building those relationships and going to the Chamber of Commerce meetings and all kinds of things so that they can build those relationships with landlords. It's an ongoing thing. They may provide support during the housing search. There's so many apps, and some communities have databases that need to be maintained and updated. And then also just identifying, mitigating any barriers to entering housing. It also looks like ensuring that there's a good fit between a landlord and a client, knowing more about the landlord, knowing more about the populations that you're serving, the households that actively, are searching for housing, can help you to identify some of those fits. And then ensuring that, shared housing is happening. So, if there is a lack of affordable housing in your community, which I'm sure many of our communities are saying that, shared housing really is an option. If a landlord has a 3-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, perhaps, one household can rent out 1 or 2 bedrooms, and then another household could rent out the other one, the third one. Being creative with those solutions is really part of that housing ID core component. And then rent and move-in assistance. So this is the part where a person has identified, our household has identified a housing unit, and now we're assisting that person with getting into the unit and then maintaining that unit throughout their time in the rapid rehousing program. So there are 9 standards, but they include providing that assistance, provide the minimum necessary to maximize the number of households housed. So we use a practice called progressive engagement, where you're, again, tailoring the amount of service and assistance that you're providing to a household based on their needs. So not too much, not too less. And ensuring that you're not doing a standard package. Every household is different. You may start off and the household is in one situation, a crisis happens, something happens, and they're in another situation. Being able to be flexible, but that requires certain things. So some activities that you'll be able to see in written move-in assistance might include helping with basic necessities. So furniture, cleaning supplies. You may assist with moving expenses. So trucks, moving trucks, movers, getting boxes, things like that. Some households may have physical needs and may need help actually packing, things like that. And then assistance getting the utility turned on and providing that ongoing subsidy. So some things might be some needs that, might be needed to support that are just the capacity to even do all of those things or some of those things. Relationships with services in the community. Perhaps you have a relationship with Walmart, a relationship with IKEA, a relationship with, in the community that can provide furniture or cleaning supplies or, towels, basic necessities. And then that financial support, the cost to actually support this, whether it is supporting the move-in assistance or the ongoing subsidy. So being able to provide that funding to back some of these activities. And also just coordination, like helping to coordinate the movement. Like that can really, if anyone has ever moved, it can be really overwhelming. There's so many moving parts, so many things to consider. And mind you, this is a household who is exiting homelessness, like already is going from one crisis almost to another crisis in a sense. And it's a big transition. So just really being able to support that coordination and that, ongoing support that they may need through that time. And again, like I mentioned, the philosophy behind it is just ensuring that you can help house as many people as possible. So using that progressive engagement, being tailored, but also believing like clients are resilient. They have skills, survival skills. They've been homeless. So, very major survival skills, and can figure some things out. So also not babying or doing for a household, really identify what are your strengths and highlighting those and helping to support those. And then the financial assistance, again, you're paying for housing, you're not alleviating poverty with rapid rehousing. This is a trampoline, a springboard into that upward mobility. However, this is establishing a foundation to, in the long run, help that person with alleviating their poverty in the long run. And again, it's not one size fits all. So in practice, that looks like assessing, the needs that people have. It might be, encouraging that client contribution from the start, identifying those strengths and really, highlighting them and helping to support them. Focus on the amount that the household needs to pay for rent. So identifying what can they afford. And really encouraging and supporting them to be able to budget, increase their income, things like that. Identify all potential resources. So not just, their formal employment that they may have. People have side jobs, they braid hair, they cut hair, they do all kinds of things, clean cars, fix cars on the side. So really being able to encourage that innovation that they may have, that entrepreneurship that they may have, and count that into their contribution to the rent. So the last core component is the case management and services core component, which has 24 standards, but I definitely won't review all of those today. And I will be sharing that with you guys in the resources at the end. But some of the standards include that case management should be client-driven. It should be voluntary, again, voluntary. There are no prerequisites to them staying in housing, no requirements. And rapid rehousing case managers should be flexible in intensity. Again, people's predicaments may change, based on what's going on in their lives, or once they're out of that crisis mode of homelessness, they may be able to really actualize and identify what their goals are and really take control of their situation more than they were able to before. So being able to be flexible and ensuring that rapid rehousing is strength-based and that it reflects that short term. Again, rapid rehousing does not in itself solve poverty. It's a short-term intervention, but it does help establish that foundation. So being able to communicate that with the household and the landlord, that your relationship is a temporary one in this moment for rapid rehousing, but you're helping to establish that solid foundation for them to continue on in permanent housing. So some activities that you might see or that are a part of this core component include identifying the household's goals, developing that housing plan, supporting them in stability. So that is loaded alone. Just supporting them in that housing stability could include anything from helping with budgets, helping to connect to resources, assisting with the household, increasing the household's income, so employment, It also could be connected to other resources like childcare or mental health supports, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And helping them build tenancy skills. So understanding what does it look like to be a good tenant, to follow your lease, to respect your neighbors, et cetera, et cetera. And just ensuring that you're ongoing, connecting folks to resources that will help them in their housing stability long term. The needs for that, again, staff capacity, people to actually do this work, but also community resources. So does your CAP agency have resources like childcare supports, like mental health supports, or case management? You have case managers that can provide this type of support. And then also too, ongoing case management after rapid rehousing ends. So, considering that rapid rehousing is a short-term program, a short-term intervention, some folks may not need the subsidy, after a while, and rapid rehousing will eventually end. Rapid rehousing programs could support maybe a couple months of case management after the subsidy ends, but then eventually they have to be discharged from the program. So perhaps your CAP agency can support some of that more longer term case management, a couple extra months, additional months, to help support that household's housing stability. So again, these are just some things to consider as I'm explaining this, the different activities, different ways that you potentially can support this work. The philosophy, again, client-driven, flexible, strength-based, and it's short-term, but that looks like being a service broker. Again, like establishing those connections, identifying what connections they may already have, helping to strengthen those connections, build bridges that were previously broken, all kinds of things like that. Helping to establish that support network, focusing on housing, again, like ultimately, I spoke of childcare, I spoke of employment, but ultimately, what are the things that are going to help you to sustain in permanent housing? And those are things that you're really keenly focusing on and helping to support. And then engaged in that problem solving, ongoing problem solving that you're doing. And every conversation should be housing focused, like communicating that there is, a final destination for, this program. Ultimately, you will be exited off the program. The household will be exited off the program. And from there, the goal is to help establish the sustainability that they need, establish those connections, those resources that will support their sustainability long-term, and just communicating that so that folks already have that end goal in mind. So just to clear up, before we get into our discussion, just wanted to do some debunking some myths. I know some of you said that you're very familiar with rapid rehousing. So it does help to reduce the length of time that people experience homelessness, and minimize the negative impact of homelessness on their lives, because you're quickly trying to exit them from homelessness and mitigate, any type of barriers they might have towards sustaining and permanent housing. But it also assists people to access resources and help them to establish and accomplish their personal goals. But it doesn't in itself eliminate poverty. I know I said that a couple of times, but rapid rehousing itself does not eliminate poverty. It's short term. So you may not get that person to, making a certain amount of money or getting above the poverty line, or, you may not accomplish those things, but again, you help to establish that foundation for that person so that they can achieve those greater goals. And also assuring that people will have affordable housing and pay 30%, they may not. And there's many people who have never experienced homelessness that unfortunately are paying greater than 30% of their income. So that can't necessarily be a goal of rapid rehousing in itself. Some folks may pay more than that 30% and likely will, within the parameters of the program, pay more than 30%. And it doesn't protect people from the impact of life losses or challenging situations. Like, it is not always going to be pretty. Most of the time it probably won't. And there will be challenges, and you're supporting that person to being able to navigate those experiences and difficult challenges that they're having, because they're going to experience them after rapid rehousing is out. So, being realistic in that sense. And it doesn't eliminate housing mobility. either some folks think that rapid housing may concentrate poverty in a certain area and certain things like that. No, this is a starting point, again, a foundation to help that household, get into permanent housing, establish some connections, and then after, being able to increase their income, being able to move, being able to do, anything that they want to do in their lives after rapid rehousing. So just wanted to kind of like debunk those myths for you guys. I know I said a lot, so I want you guys to be able to take that in. I see there might be some questions. Someone's asking about the rapid housing toolkit. If it's what I think you're talking about, the Alliance has a rapid housing toolkit. We actually just put out a new version of that, a revised version, updated version of that, I think in February. So just be mindful too that I'll be sharing that resource at the end. And client-centered approach is a question there about learning about tangible tools to do that. I think we'll get into a little bit of that in the discussion, but if not, I'm happy to answer that in the Q&A section at the end too. So if I can hear from you guys just a little bit about what has your organization engaged in, and have you done any rapid rehousing, just in the chat, housing identification or moving assistance, providing case management. Has your organization done any of those things to date? Or have you done it in other capacities, thinking about your role within a CAP agency? Perhaps you're not doing it now, but you did at a previous CAP agency you worked at, you're aware of it. So in the chat, just feel free to share anything that your organization has already engaged in. Not seeing any. Well, that's okay, because that's why we're here. We're helping to inspire those things. And thank you, Eric, for mentioning that. A huge challenge is the application process that creates barriers to housing. Absolutely, and that's why we need the supports to be able, the manpower, the resources to be able to mitigate those, to be able to support people in the application process, to understand what they're being asked to share, being asked to provide. Ensuring that they have the proper identification, information that they may need to complete these applications. If there's any linguistic barriers, being able to help resolve those. I see some transitional housing involvement. Kathy, you're saying you guys get ESG. That's awesome. Cool. Okay, so we're gonna get to the brainstorm a little later about what you could do, but I wanna ensure that we have this discussion with Brian, and hopefully that can generate some ideas that you all have. So I wanna welcome Brian, and I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so that you guys can see him. Hi, Brian, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for the introduction, and hope everyone is doing well today. Thanks for joining the discussion in the webinar. I guess we can just kind of dive right into it. Just kind of like segue right into the chat line. So it looked like Eric Johnson is referring to cumbersome application process. Are you referring to the actual housing application process, or the process involved to identify households to be approved for rapid rehousing?
That's a great distinction there, Brian. The actual application. So the housing application.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's the actual housing application. And if so, yeah, that can and will be rather cumbersome, repetitive, redundant, but tying back into some of the core components, I think it's very important to incorporate self-sustainable measures from the word go. So if a household is identifying and requesting through your agency that rapid rehousing is the request from the household, then I try to incorporate myself and try to train my staff to Identify any and all self-sustainable measures that you can identify for the household. So if that means, if there's a list of 10 applications, we're going to prompt and encourage the household to complete all 10 applications. Of course, if there is a need for an accommodation for a disability, cognitive, physical, we can have that discussion and we can provide that through the level of case management, and we will of course accommodate in those scenarios. But if there isn't a barrier, if you will, from a cognitive or a physical standpoint, we're definitely pushing those self-sustainable measures, because we want to create an understanding that this is their circumstance. Yes, we're here to help. We're here to be the supportive crutch as much as possible. However, we need you to do some of the housing search. Here's some resources that we've already accumulated, but it's going to take you to follow up with these resources, contact the property management groups, go see the apartment complex, etc. Go look at the location, go look at the area, because we want to make sure that, you know, the household's preference is critical and thought of throughout the entire process.
And, you know, with that too, Brian, I think it'd be helpful for folks to hear a little bit about, you know, what rapid rehousing services do you provide? A little bit about, you know, your background on that, what your organization is with that. And just so you know, guys, again, the engagement of CAP HCs can exist on a continuum with regards to supporting rapid housing. Ryan's HC does it all, but hopefully this inspires you guys to maybe do it all too, but also maybe take some pieces of it that you're like, okay, I think that's a good place to start. So go ahead, Ryan, let's hear a little bit about what you're doing.
Thank you, I appreciate it. So I've been the director of the Supportive Services Program with Community Action Agency here in Hartford County since 2017. And anyone who's not familiar with our agency, our Community Action Agency has a food pantry for the community, Maryland Energy assistance capabilities within our umbrella of services, a mobile food pantry. Within my department, the Supportive Services Department is the centralized intake location for anyone experiencing homelessness here in Hartford County. So since 2014, we've been that premier agency here in Hartford County. So kind of like the narrative is kind of embedded throughout the entire county. If someone's on a hardship experience in an at-risk situation, or is in fact already in an episode of homelessness, they need to be directed to our agency, apply for services, and hopefully we can, you know, start from that point to fill in some of the gaps that, you know, a household may have, triage that particular level of need, and then hopefully, if it is rapid rehousing, start by providing those resources, start by providing, you know, some of those applications. And of course, if income-based housing is desired, as it typically is, providing those providers immediately, because anytime that there's an income-based wait list, an income-based housing, there will of course be a wait list. So we want to try to get those applications in as quickly as possible, so then you can work up the wait list while we try to identify other more mainstream opportunities of housing, or maybe even thinking outside the box, like Tasmia said earlier, about trying to reinvent what your housing inventory may look like in your community. But I guess last but not least, I guess I'm selling myself short. I also do street outreach in Hartford County, which ironically enough presents the talking points of rapid rehousing, presents the opportunity for me to develop rapport, create opportunities, show choice, present options, so that particular population understands that I'm just not out there to engage, push them off their site, contact law enforcement, and we're actually there as a supportive crutch, as an extension of Hartford Community Action Agency, trying to incorporate SNAP benefits, trying to incorporate linkages to a healthcare navigator, trying to make the linkages to a harm reduction provider, make the linkages to a behavioral health provider. And above all those other targeted areas, of course, present any and all housing efforts and also endeavors to put a person in the best position for housing, because of course, some of the slides in Tasmia said earlier, everyone's housing ready, of course, but we're all familiar with a lot of these threes in the chat line, everyone that should be understanding and well familiar with being document ready. So a household could be ready for housing. However, are they technically, do they have the documents to, you know, adequately apply for that particular housing provider in that neck of the woods of your county? So those are the things that we need to try to engage in through street outreach as it transitions into rapid rehousing, to put them in the best position as possible so we can make that seamless transition from that unfortunate, vulnerable housing circumstance, and then merge a shelter or an affordable housing opportunity moving forward.
Great point. And for those who, you so happen to be someone who is also doing street outreach, but I think, what you just said really highlights a major point that, that rapport, those conversations, that trust, it starts from day one, whether it's a different person. If I was the street outreach worker and Brian, you were rapid rehousing, I need to also keep that in mind, that assisting this person, even though I may not be the person that sees them to permanent housing, it does start with that first contact, that first face, having those relationships, building that relationship, having that trust. But then also you spoke to documentation. So perhaps street outreach folks are, having those conversations, helping them folks connect to their city hall, or where Social Security, things like that, so they can get those documentations, that important information that they might need to apply for permanent housing. Again, I'm not, as an outreach provider, I'm not the rapid rehousing provider, but we exist in the system together. We have common goals, and so I'm also doing that work. Same with emergency shelters, same with folks who maybe a diversion specialist. We're all kind of part of that continuum of services and support to assist a household into permanent housing. So yes, there is that conversation of document readiness, and that's not to be confused with the housing readiness. But I will want to remind you all that there are landlords who will rent and you do not have an ID. You may not, I've been a rapid rehousing provider, so I'm just I always got that little caveat, I've done it. I have definitely done it.
It's
so
possible.
You want that to be a barrier. You want to assist the person they may need it for employment, all kinds of, housing stability related reasons. But don't let that be a barrier, because there are landlords who will rent people who are undocumented, all kinds of things that you may think are barriers, and don't let that stop you. And Brian, you spoke a lot about when we were talking about, just engaging with landlords, because ultimately we could do our best and do our best to serve folks, but if we don't have housing to help assist and connect people to, there's a gap there. There's only but so much we can do. So can you talk about your work to engage with landlords and build those relationships?
Absolutely. I think that's a great talking point, because that is a critical aspect of the rapid rehousing program. The ability to be able to present actual housing inventory to the population that you're serving is very critical. So one of the things that I've kind of embarked upon here in Hartford County, specifically right before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, was creating what they call room sharing, providing those opportunities, because I had a handful of private landlords approach me, mentioning to the fact that they have a 3-bedroom house, a 4-bedroom house that they just acquired, and they were curious to know if I could identify through street outreach specifically individuals who are in vulnerable situations that need housing, right? So that stimulated the conversation of pursuing those particular options and those resources in the community, and that has really been one of probably the most critical resource that I had with the rapid rehousing program throughout the entire pandemic. Because if everyone was familiar during that time frame, the CDC was prompting COCs to exit everyone out of congregate shelter. And then at one point in time, it was the recommendations to move everyone out of congregate shelter because of the concerns associated to COVID, and they were in hotels. So then the emphasis across the board with rapid rehousing was trying to exit households from those hotels or emergency shelters that were still up and running into a stable housing situation, and working folks into single bedroom options, or SBOs, as I like to call them, what presented the opportunity for me to reduce the roster capacity that we have here for the adult shelter. And the same can be said for, the acquisition of identifying all low-income tax credit housing providers in my county, because essentially, because at one point in time, back in 2017 to 2019, my department was responsible for the eviction prevention services here in Harford County. So I took that experiences and relationships with all the local landlords and kind of parlayed it into a conversation of rapid rehousing. How can a person with a housing choice voucher be seen as having the income that is designated for that particular housing unit? And they just use it upon as, well, it's the housing choice voucher, it's a certified subsidy, it's an identified subsidy here in our county, here in our state, and we're just well familiar with it. But what I presented to maybe like 4 or 5 low income tax credit providers was to propose rapid rehousing in my agency to act as a 12-month guarantor, because at the time we had the budget, because there was no housing opportunities in our county. Things were pretty much on gridlock. So I had a boatload of money that I was just trying to spend, and I used some of that as the means to merge vulnerable households, targeted households into low income tax credit by acting as the guarantor for that household. So of course the lease is in their name, but me writing a summary of the rapid rehousing assistance that I will provide for that particular household for 12 months was the deciding factor, actually, to create a corporate process within their internal structure to partner with my agency and to use that letter of endorsement as almost as a housing choice voucher. Because it's basically the same thing. A housing choice voucher is just a guarantee, a guarantor's subsidy. And then the household, of course, is responsible for the remaining portion. That's the same approach that I utilize with low-income tax providers in households that did have income, but limited income. And then I used the grant funds to be the guarantor, the subsidy, and then utilize the limited income from the household to pay, the difference of the subsidy. And ironically enough, I just sent in the last couple payments for the 12 months of assistance, and all those households have adequately transitioned into that community and are paying their rent independently now, I should know, which was very good news to hear from that particular housing provider. So those 2 interventions under the rapid rehousing allowed me to engage landlords to present and kind of provide options in the community for our targeted population. But last but not least, for the landlords and the property management groups that were still hesitant to do that, the landlord incentive under the ESGCV funds was a critical grant component that allowed us to really come to the negotiating table, if you will, and add an additional incentive, an additional fee on top of security deposit prorated and any additional identified rental assistance for that particular household. So that has uniquely created a path for 3 property management groups that are here in our backyard in the town of Edgewood, that allowed property owners to just create some of the housing capacity that they had, but they didn't want to rent it and put it on the market because of the eviction moratorium. But because of the landlord incentive question or just presenting that as an option, it really gave me the opportunity to acquire about 40% of the capacity at this particular property management group. And of course, you can only imagine 40% housing capacity. We really cleaned the streets up a little bit here in Harford County. So I was really greatly much appreciated for that venture. So those are some of the useful things that I've done here in Harford County, and hopefully some of those approaches can be useful for other communities.
Thank you so much for that. It seems like you have been very creative, and which, that's really what this work takes, being creative, thinking outside the box, and really just centering the people that need our help the most. So thanks so much for your work. And honestly, I'm sure there's so much that you can share. I just wish we had a little bit more time. But I encourage you all to, reach out to myself, Brian, to get additional information about the work that he's doing, the work that we're doing at the Alliance, in ways that you guys can get started, ways that you guys can really, to really support the work of rapidly rehousing folks. I quickly wanted to, so thank you again, Brian, for that information. And I quickly want to share my screen again to show you all some resources that we have available on our website, the National Alliance to End Homelessness. We have a rapid rehousing toolkit, which talks way more in detail about those core components and the critical aspects of rapid rehousing. Pressure point series that we just recently released that provides resources and discusses shared housing, progressive engagement, and housing first. And some helpful, infographics, things like that, fact sheets that you guys might find really interesting. And then also those rapid rehousing performance benchmarks and program standards. So remember, I only reviewed a couple of those, during the presentation today because of the lack of time, but there are so many more that are very essential to understand. And then there are going to be additional learning opportunities. So the Alliance has an online learning platform called the Center for Learning, or you hear it referred to as a CFL, where we're going to be offering courses for free for a certain amount of you guys. It's going to be limited, unfortunately. But if you would like information about our Intro to Rapid Rehousing course or our trauma-informed care, to make sure I say the right course, our trauma-informed care course for people experiencing homelessness, those are going to be accessible to a limited group. And Peter will be sending out more information. So I'm going to turn it back over to Peter. This is a way that you can contact myself, and I want to shout out Sharon McDonald, who's part of the Alliance and really coordinated all of this with Peter. So thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you again. That was awesome. Really enjoyed that. That was a wonderful presentation. Thank you. Shout out to both presenters there. I'm just going to quickly go over a couple more resources that we have to use. So let me just share my screen real quick. So, there we go. So we're going to have, as always, we have our Community Action Academy. So if you have not accessed that already, please feel free to reach out to anybody on the Practice Transformation team. It has like very vital courses that go over health intersections, our family-centered coaching. We have our 201 family-centered coaching course on there right now, which is pretty vital in terms of all the work we do as CAAs. Then, of course, we have our health intersections convening coming up. So the health intersections convening this year is going to be focused on the triads approach to making health trauma-informed healthcare systems. So triad stands for trauma and resilience-informed inquiry for adversity, distress, and strengths. My colleague Lily will be putting the registration link into chat, along with some registration links for a couple of the other things we're going to be going over. We have our Achieving Generative Leadership Through Human Service Value Curve training coming up. This is one of two that we offered. This is the second one. So if you already attended the first one, no need to attend this one. It's going to be the same content and basically the same presenters, but it's going to be going over the human service value curve and how you can use that to better your service delivery systems. So it's going to be April 28th from 12:30 p.m. through 2 p.m. And then we want to shout out to our funders again, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the Administration for Children and Families, Offices of Community Services, Division of Community Assistance. Thank you all so much. Here's the contact information for everybody on our team as well. And we're going to be sending out slides and the recording and some more resources for you all on how to implement rapid rehousing at your CAAs. Thank you again. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.